Leadership advice usually sounds like a pep rally with a megaphone. Be bold, be loud, take charge. But what if the secret sauce isn't speaking at all? Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk and explore why the best leaders don't lead with solutions. They lead with questions and they listen to the answers.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Peter A. Schein, is the co-founder and COO of the OCLI. He has 30 years of industry experience in marketing strategy and corporate development at technology pioneers such as Apple and Sun Microsystems, Inc. He's the author of the new book, Humble Inquiry, and I'm excited to have him with us today. Happy to have you with us. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And I don't think I did that justice. Humble Inquiry has been out. Walk me through the progression of Humble Inquiry.
Yes, I'd love to do that. The sort of the backstory, if you will, is that my father wrote a book in about 2009, 2010 called Helping. And in that book, it was a Barrett Kohler book. In that book, he had a chapter called Humble Inquiry. And in discussions with our editors at Barrett Kohler, we decided that that should be a book in itself. And so in 2011, I want to say, the first edition of Humble Inquiry came out. And then about 4 years later, we did a new edition of that where we made some improvements and added some new stories. And that's been a very popular book. It also spawned something that we call the Humble Leadership series that included a book that we wrote together called Humble Leadership that's done quite well. And then another book called Humble Consulting that has a broad following in the process consulting world that my father, Ed Schein, was part of sort of starting in the 60s and 70s. So this current edition is entirely written by me, but the voice of my father is very much there. A lot of the stories are his and mine. I have added a few new stories. But this is a joint effort that I had the privilege of doing all the keying on, but it's work that we did together. So
yeah, that's what a great story. I always believe that I talk about it frequently that you don't find a book, it kind of finds you. But this is a little bit deeper than that. This is a book and an experience. So I will be humble with my questions. Yes.
Right. Yeah. This goes back to, dinner table conversations years ago.
Very cool. Well, let me come out of the gate with this one then, because I was thinking about this, was looking over the book and your materials. And, as a sales trainer and as a guy who's been working with, people teaching influence and persuasion, I'm not new to the concept of asking questions and listening. And I don't think 99.9% of the people we talk to are. Now, we'll get to the part about that doesn't mean they're doing it. But I guess my first question is, we tell people over and over again, that's kind of the building blocks of trust or anything. We got to ask questions and listen. Most people look at you like, oh, you're not talking to me, are you? So why is it that everybody knows it and most people just don't do it?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think, there's a couple things that I think this book can help with.
Okay.
One of them is sort of recognizing that humble inquiry or, inquiry broadly as you're describing it, is sort of an art and an attitude. And the art is and I say art because it's a creative process. It's not a science in the sense that there's a rubric that you can follow. We're humans. We do things that are predictable and we do things that are unpredictable. And so the art of humble inquiry is reading those situations, being humble in the moment, and knowing how to draw the other person out by asking the right kinds of questions. There are questions that are open-ended. There are questions that are warm and not cold. My father had a saying that telling turns me cold. Asking warms me up. Well, your job as an inquirer, and arguably as a leader, is to draw people out, because the leader has to at some level recognize that the people they're leading collectively know more than the leader does. The leader may have a vision that they're leading toward, but in order to realize that vision, you have to draw out the room. The room knows more than you do. So you need to, and that's what we mean by humble, accepting that people around you know more than you do, collectively. So it's asking questions that draw people in, that draw people closer to you, that open them up in ways that other kinds of questions might not. And we go through in the book different kinds of inquiry as a way of trying to understand, trying to sort of triangulate, what do we mean by humble inquiry, and what's different. So as an example, diagnostic inquiry, where you have a hypothesis and you ask questions that test that hypothesis. Or confrontive inquiry, where you think something has gone awry or somebody's done something wrong, and you ask questions that interrogate that problem or that issue. There's process inquiry, where you ask questions that sort of kind of step everybody back and say, what's going on here? Why are we doing this? Why are we having these kinds of, disputes or arguments or harumphs? The idea of process inquiry is that lets everybody sort of take a breather, take a step back. The reason for characterizing all those different kinds of inquiry is that it starts to allow us to recognize what works and what doesn't. One of the things that's important in this book is that we try to interrogate the idea of advice. And in fact, there's a foreword written by Michael Bonier-Stanier, who wrote the book called The Advice Trap. That's a very, very influential, very popular, and very important book about how when somebody comes and asks you for advice, do you know what they're really asking for? Or when you say, do you mind if I give you some advice? You're setting the bit. You're setting the tone for a conversation that is not going to be humble inquiry. It's going to be telling. It's going to be proposing something that you don't know that the other person will really value. But that's kind of what advice is. So the idea of the advice trap is you get down your own path, and you recognize that that may not be the path that is most helpful to the other person. And so often asking is veiled telling. And that's so much what the humble inquiry idea is about, is your attitude is genuinely curious about what's going on for them, for the other person, for the group that you're inquiring of. Rather than sort of having the idea in your head and asking questions that validate that idea.
Yeah. Let me ask you, I was listening to your different sort of levels of questioning there. I'm going to put my own term to it, and I just don't know which category it's in. And we don't start with this, obviously, we have to create trust in our questions too. But when we really, in a sales world, we're not there if everything's working at 100%. Now, that doesn't mean we walk in, the client says, here are all our problems that we're looking to have fixed. But they're almost curious about a problem that they haven't even made a commitment to solve yet. What kind of questioning do you, in your book, what do you call it when you ask somebody questions about things that they're struggling with, challenges that they have? Questions that don't make them feel all that comfortable. Ironically, they do if you've earned the right to ask it. But if we just throw out a question from left field about a problem we coincidentally fix, it shows our hand a little bit. Where in your questioning, I see you nodding good, because this is the longest question I've ever asked. Well, so where in your question is what I'm trying to describe?
Yeah. Well, I think if you don't mind, I want to touch on another theme that's related to this, which is recognizing different kinds of relationships with people that you are developing a partnership with, you're selling to, you work with as peers or as managers or subordinates.
Okay.
Um, the levels of relationship, and this is spelled out in this book and basically all of our books because we think it's a fundamental idea about how humans work, but is to recognize that there are four levels of relationship, and the sort of the least arguably least common, but also least effective relationship is one that's we call a -1 relationship. It's built around dominance and exploitation. That's uncommon at work, but there are situations where we can point to certain contexts at work where that is how you would characterize that relationship, and it's probably something that needs to be fixed. It's probably something that's not healthy. Then there's something called level one, which we describe broadly as transactional. And then there's level two, which we describe broadly as personal, where you recognize the importance of developing a whole person to whole person relationship, where it isn't just about the roles that you two have, the person selling something and the person buying something. Those are two roles, but those are also two whole human beings. And there may be places where the personal issues, personal details, personal pluses and minuses, writ large, are actually relevant to that discussion. And so, going back to your question, I think the questioning that allows the person selling something, the person buying something, to develop a level of openness and trust, to feel like, all right, we're kind of working on the same thing. We're working on an exchange, but we're going to do it in a way that isn't transactional. Because then, I'm going to feel, as the buyer, I'm going to feel a little bit better about how that whole thing is going. And B, as the seller, I'm going to have an easier time 6 months from now going back to that person and saying, what more can I do to help you? That person may then feel, all right, we developed a level of openness and trust. We're going to call it a level 2 relationship that moved beyond the transactional relationship. The transactional relationship ended with the transaction. And then the next time, 6 months later, when you want a new transaction, you have to start all over again. The point about humble inquiry to develop that level 2 relationship is that you don't have to start the relationship all over again. You have that deeper personal bond that allows you to quickly move to problem solving down the road. You don't have to reestablish the relationship. That's our problem with transactional relationships, that they just lead to the next transaction. They don't lead to a substrate that allows you to streamline and move quickly to problem solving down the road.
What's interesting is you are almost a subject matter expert, if I may, and you can tell me, no, Rob, you got that wrong again. But you're doing a great job in your book. It sounds like on the trust side of this, okay, and which it's funny, most sales models do everything but spend time on the trust side of all this. And now, hopefully, smarter guys than me, and I'd like to think maybe I'm humbly one of them, spend time on the trust side because we can't get at the harder questions if somebody doesn't trust us. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that our side, I'm speaking for the sales world right now, the sales world, we're all of the belief that most people left on their own do not solve problems very well. They tend to hesitate. They tend to wait till the problem gets bigger and bigger. And once it gets overwhelming, okay, they find religion. They go and and solve the problem. We're trying to keep them from waiting that long. And so we have to ask tougher questions. And interesting, you use the word interrogate. We're desperately trying not to interrogate, and yet we're trying to go second and third level down on the questions. That's why, again, when you brought up open probes, basic as that is, Peter, I tape record people. I have them put in their smartphones. All the people are asking questions and listening. And when they're asking questions, they're certainly keeping them open early because more somebody talks, generally, the more they trust or like us. The only way to prove to them that they're unconsciously incompetent is to play their voice back and say, okay, count the questions. Now, of the 1, 2 questions you asked in 5 minutes, how many of them were open? But it's a blind spot for many people. In any case, I almost see it as like a tag thing of you really working hard on the front end of this conversation, whereas we tend to focus on the middle back end. How much of that did I get right?
Yeah, I think you got a lot of it right. By the way, on the issue of interrogate,
Yeah.
I tend to use that word when I mean sort of deeply problem solve.
Mm,
Because interrogate in the sense of, which would, in say an interrogation room, that's a level -1 relationship. That's where one person has all the power and the other person has no power.
right.
That kind of relationship does not belong in a sales context at all. I think we can all agree on that. If we're in that context, maybe it's the person being sold to who is interrogating the salesperson. I don't, I don't think that's going to lead to a very productive resolution.
The difference between that first building block of open and closed questions. I have people, remember I told you I'll have them tape it, with big smiles going, I asked 42 questions in 5 minutes. Okay, well, we already know, both you and I know that. Okay, how many, that sounds like an interrogation. That
Yeah,
is just close probe, close probe,
right,
close probe.
right. As if the number of questions you ask is part of the
Exactly.
quota. But so there's a story that we tell at the beginning of this book that that I think is really foundational. The story is somebody's driving up to the North Woods, and they come to an intersection, and they're not really sure which way to go. And so the traveler says to a local who's sitting, on a porch nearby, if I take that road to the right, will it get me to where I'm going? And the traveler says, yeah, that'll get you there. If I take that road to the left, will it get me to where I'm going? And the local says, yeah, sure, that'll get you there as well. And the traveler then says, which obviously is an obvious next question, is, well, does it matter which way I go? And the local said, well, not to me, it doesn't. And the point is that traveler is asking closed-ended questions that is not going to help him or her get
Right.
to the better answer.
Yeah.
If instead that traveler said, I'm trying to get to this town, and I'm lost, and I would appreciate your help. You're opening yourself up, you're being vulnerable, and you are going to ask questions like, you're going to ask open-ended questions. I'm traveling up here. Do you ever go to that town, and how do you go? Let the person warm up to you.
Right.
Don't ask cold, directive questions that can be answered with yes, no answers, because then you may be nowhere.
Right.
And this is sort of the point I was trying to make about advice, is that if you ask a bunch of leading questions that get you to your advice endpoint, and then the person says, yeah, that's great, I tried that a month ago. You're nowhere, because
Right.
you didn't draw the person out on what was really going on, what's really the issue. You formed a solution in your head, and you went there too quickly.
Yeah.
Well, our traveler, ask these questions in a way that, in a way, put down the local, just corner the local in, whereas the local has all of this local knowledge about, logging trucks are always on that road. And you don't want to be behind a logging truck. Well, you didn't, the question you asked didn't help you with that. Or, oh, it turns out they're doing a major resurfacing on that road. Well, yeah, the road will get you there, but it'll take you 3 hours longer because they're doing all that road construction. You ask the questions the right way, you draw that information out.
Yeah. Every now and then I'll make this statement and I can see my audiences wince when I tell them I'm not telling you that knowledge isn't important because they're very, a lot of continuing education, more knowledge, particularly in the financial industry, more knowledge, more knowledge. And obviously we want people staying up and relevant. There isn't a single continuing education class, by the way, on how to ask questions and listen. There isn't a single course on probing skills. So it's kind of sad that, when I'm telling them, I'm not telling you it isn't important. I'm telling you it's just a bit overrated because ultimately the relationship, whether it's a sales relationship or a consulting or just business or relationship, it's going to come down to trust. It's going to come down to exactly what you're describing. And sometimes it's almost a weird irony. The longer somebody stays in an industry, meaning in a sense, the smarter they get, the more they lose sight of where we are right now in this conversation of it's okay to know how that bank works. Let them tell you how the bank works. A, as you just said, you might pick up on a few things they do differently. And B, they're feeling a better connection and trust. So it's not about that you didn't know the answer. And that's why I'm interested in sort of tunneling down with you a little bit on, not just the humble, but just being in a position to let people basically tell us what we may already know. That's not an instinct. So, what do you tell the person? Forget the sales world right now. I'm not forgetting you, sales folks. I'm just letting Peter forget you. But it doesn't have to be a salesperson. What do you tell a leader? What do you tell somebody when they tell you, well, but I know the answers. I'm just telling them the answers. How do you get them to slow down a little bit?
Well, I think, the situation that you characterize where you've been in an industry for a long time, you you know a lot. You know where the bodies are buried. You
Right,
know how
right.
we got from point A to point B to C to D and so on. And that historical knowledge is obviously very important. But at the same time, does that end up sort of giving us an overconfident sense?
Mm.
I think, the reason that empathy and vulnerability have uh, have become so popular in our kind of, in our current kind of zeitgeist, business parlance, is that I think vulnerability and empathy are good ways for us to keep our overconfidence in check. That at the end of the day, you still are vulnerable to things that you don't know. And yes, you are confident that you know a lot about how this business is wired, but but you may have 20 somethings in that room who are thinking, okay, boomer, okay, boomer, okay, boomer, meaning your knowledge is old.
Right.
I know things that are now and maybe next week that you just don't know. And it's just you're a different cohort. You're a different headspace. And it's important to be, as a leader who, again, if you've been in the business for a while, you're older, and recognize that there may be a lot of things that 20 something doesn't know about your business, but there are some things that 20 something does know that are relevant to your decision making down the road. So allow vulnerability and empathy to be, healthy checks on your confidence. It's, those things are mutually beneficial. Those
Yeah.
things are synergistic. Empathy and confidence are synergistic. And
Right.
we should always be mindful of that.
I think that's really well said. I couldn't agree with you more. I know as a professional speaker, I actually went into a slump about 10 years, not even maybe 5 years into my career. My numbers were dropping on my evaluations, couldn't figure it out. And it was particularly perplexing because I really felt like I know this curriculum like the back of my hand right now. There's no question that can come from this audience that I can't answer. And Peter, you're already getting a head start on where the problem for me was. And I actually flew another Xerox trainer out and I said, "Can't figure it out. I'm on fire." And he said, "You, there's no humility." There's no humility in what you're doing. You do know everything. You're making sure to let everybody know just how smart you are. And the moment I dialed it back just a little bit and didn't have to know the answer to every question, had some hunches, you know, uh, told mixed in a few stories of where I blew a couple of really bad sales, just like they do. Everything started to change.
Yeah.
You know,
They know your resume,
right,
right? And
right,
and being sort of, telling and telling and telling is just sort of an echo of your resume.
yeah,
Going in and saying, um, I don't know what to do.
right,
All of a sudden, they're not going to question. They've got your resume. They know who
right,
you are.
right,
But if you say I don't know what to do, then you're sharing in a way that allows the solution space to be bigger. I guess
right,
that's the point, is
right,
that your solution space based on what you know is bounded. You want it to be bigger. You
right.
want there to be more options, not fewer options.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. And speaking of bigger, now we're adding hybrid to the mix. And I know that you added some, I believe you added some new content for in terms of our how we communicate, particularly how we listen in a Zoom world.
Yeah.
Can you throw some tips at us, just in terms of being better listeners when we're communicating virtually?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason that we added that chapter obviously is because between the editions we had this, cataclysmic event of, work from home, the pandemic. Everybody was forced into learning new, things that in some respects were better. And obviously were new, but let's take a look at how maybe some of our skills actually, or our abilities were actually improved by doing everything through a video camera. And so I think there's a couple points. One is that the video, interface does allow you some flexibility as somebody speaking or somebody inquiring to kind of, to check your notes, to sort of check yourself. It's a lot harder if you're in a conference room and you're expected to have eye-to-eye contact to sort of to do a little bit of kind of real-time reflection, real-time mindfulness. So I would argue that the video conference format gives you a little bit of a degree or two of freedom that you don't have in a conference room. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have it in a conference room. In fact, is there anything in our rules that say two people in a conference room having a tough discussion about something very important? Is there any rule that says, let's take a 30-second process break, or let's take a minute to check our notes? I don't think we tend to do that. We, are as humans at work, we're representing ourselves or representing a role, and that may come across as a vulnerability or a weakness that we don't want to represent. I would argue that over video, we have a little bit more flexibility. We can retune in real time in a way that I think is helpful.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we found is interesting is that we were all sort of, metaphorically kind of stripped bare when we had to go onto to video as opposed to in person. In person, we're dressed right. We're our facial expressions are right. Our body language is right. At least, we're trying, right? Um, Over video, it's sort of like we didn't know what the rules were, so we started making them up. The how people use virtual backgrounds versus how people, sort of realized afterwards, oh God, I should have used a virtual background because the visual of the unmade bed in the background was kind of awkward. That didn't really help me. I think the video created a mindfulness about the situation, about what is it like when we're trying to have a open conversation. How do we build trust over this, distant medium? And I think in a lot of ways we figured out ways to make it better than, it seemed far worse, right? Humans are supposed to be together. They're supposed to be in a room. They're supposed to be breathing the same air and feeling the same feelings of that context. But I think in a way the video allowed us to kind of be mindful of that. And then also to recognize how important it is when we do get together. So it made us, I think, more effective when we realize we can have 4 days a week that are all video, but when we're together, we're more appreciative of each other, and we're more mindful of what we need to do to make the most of our time together. Because as we know from the pandemic, we're going to still have to get stuff done, but when we're not together.
Right.
So I think it improved in a way how we meet and how we interact in meetings. One thing I wasn't a big fan of is the 8 Zoom hour day that allowed for no spontaneity, no contemporaneous, and in a way it allowed the agenda of a meeting to be even more coercive than they already are. Did we say to ourselves, for every meeting over Zoom, we're going to allow 10 minutes at the end to do a checkout, where we're going to say what worked and what do we need to change, the plus delta idea. We didn't do that. We scheduled 8 hours of Zooms and allowed that to be a normal workday. Well, that isn't how a normal workday works when we're in the office. So let's try to do the best of both,
Yeah.
Let's try.
Yeah, I like that. You're right. It sneaks up on us a little bit because we're filling our day, particularly those that are coaching. They'll run those hours. It looks good on paper, but it's if you really want to be of value to somebody, that's a little bit rough.
Yeah.
You're definitely a half full guy. I'll tell you that. But when it comes to virtual, there are a lot of people that will attack it. I am too, by the way. I learned a few things. First, I learned I can only wear my green shirts on the weekend because I don't wear them during the week. I'm just a floating head when I do.
Yeah, I found that with stripes.
Yeah.
They
get a little blurry. Yeah, you hypnotize somebody. The second thing, in terms of looking at notes, I'm with you. What I've adjusted my clients to is take notes, look at your notes, but don't forget to center up your notes or tell somebody that you're taking notes. Because if we don't, and we look to the side while we're listening so well that we're actually should be flattering the other person, what you're saying is so interesting. I'm actually writing some of this down. But if we're just sort of mindlessly looking to the side, it looks like, as far as I know, you're checking your email. So really centering it up. And how about this one, Peter, for me? I don't want to break people's hearts, but I'm often not really visually looking at the person that's talking to me. If I need my notes are where your head is. And because, again, I want to sort of maintain that eye contact. Now I pull them down and I bring them up, and I bring them down and I bring them up. But even knowing where to look in the camera so you're making eye contact, not screen contact, is big.
I think that's very big. The half full part of me, though, will say that we relaxed because it's video and we're all getting used to it. We kind of relaxed our expectations about eye contact a little bit. And
Yeah.
I think that's helpful because I
Yeah.
think there are times when eye contact is distracting.
Yeah.
And it may be more natural to look away. Maybe you're looking at notes. Maybe the dog or the cat did something that you have to look away for. I mean, again, that's what happened when we moved our offices into our bedrooms and
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
family rooms. But it's just I think eye contact is tricky. And one of the things we talk about in the book is that there are situations where your communication may be better without contact. So we go through simulations where one of them is a campfire where imagine it's night and you're around a campfire. You can barely even see the other people you're talking to. Um, and you're staring at this fire that's this incredible visual distraction. Who can not look at a campfire? It's one of the great joys in life. Um, so you don't you in that context you almost eye contact is almost difficult. So you don't try. And
Right.
then you may find that you have a much more kind of open and flowing conversation because it's about your mouth and your ears and not about your eyes. Sometimes that's important. The other thing that I think we learned during the pandemic is you have a different kind of a conversation when you're outside walking, the walking meeting or the twalk or whatever we wanted to call it. We came up with terms for an outdoor, maybe you were wearing your mask, whatever. But if you're having a meeting while you're walking, you're not staring each other across the table, eye contact, eye to eye. You have to kind of watch where you're going. And
Yeah.
I had an experience with a colleague who I developed a relationship with over Zoom, and then we met at a conference together. And it was great to sort of see each other and to shake hands and to have a meal together. That was super. But then we went on a long walk and realized afterwards that we almost communicated better on the walk because the eye contact was reinforcing. It wasn't stifling or intimidating. So let's recognize, some people are better with eye contact than others. That's just human. That's just the way we're wired. Let's recognize that sometimes communication works better when eye contact isn't what we expect it to be in a conference room, in a meeting. Let's allow ourselves the flexibility to speak from the heart and the mouth, not necessarily with our eyes.
Well, you slid into a bit of a contrarian view on that one, and I think it's smart. You're right. Maybe and I'm thinking about myself. Maybe sometimes I'm overcompensating. I mean, I'm right down to a drop down camera. I really want to make eye contact with people, but I'm wondering. I always come back to if I'm at Starbucks having a cup of coffee, am I staring that hard? I'll go back to the note part and just say, watch that when you actually physically take the notes, because it's usually something really important. And that's the time where it looks like I'm checking out. I'm actually really checking in. But
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
right. We want this to be as authentic as possible. And sometimes I look at my notes when I'm having a conversation with somebody. It's not, I do bring in notes. So well said. I like that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
and let's gut check. Why is it that the traditional psychoanalysis had the therapist behind the subject, so the subject couldn't even see the therapist's eyes if he or she wanted to?
Right.
The
Yeah.
patient cannot be distracted by, if the patient says something and, even as much as a one eyebrow raise in the part of the therapist might completely throw that patient off.
You're
That
right.
is a tell that is not helpful to the patient.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's an extreme context, but there are situations in our conversations at work where I think we should think about that. That
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe you're better off telling me what's really going on, if I'm not glaring at you, asking you what's really going on, well, that may not be the best way to open somebody up.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. And there are many sort of sitcoms and things where you've seen where people go, "Why are you writing that? What did I just say? Is that wrong? Is there something wrong with me?" So we see it play out, theatrically, uh, but actually, realistically, when you think about it, did I just say something that was wrong? Why are you? What exactly are you writing? So, yeah, I guess suppose that could be a distraction as well. Huh. Wow. The first half of this conversation, you were going right where I thought you were going. The second half, you're traveling in some other areas, and that's why we do more editions and we kind of get deeper and into our inquiry. Let me finish you off with one question about your father,
Yep.
Edgar. Was that his name?
Yep.
Okay.
Edgar H.
Okay.
Yep. Edgar
Edgar Schein.
Yep.
Big in organizational psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Give me one lesson, and 60 seconds or less, so a real quick, punchy lesson that you learned from him that surprised you, as you've surprised me a couple times today. Give me one that surprised you or changed your own perspective.
You're going to ask me for one, huh?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm asking, and I want it in a nice, tidy bundle.
Okay, well, I guess I will say I have the benefit of one of the sorry for this is gonna make a long story short here. I'll try to, or
All
maybe
right.
I'm making a short story long. But when he passed away, I had the sort of the honor to kind of unpack his office, and on his office wall were a number of little post-it notes that were sort of his reminders, little points of inspiration, things that he knew that as he was having conversations with people, he could use them as little triggers to stimulate ways to help, ways to move the conversation along, ways to build openness and trust with the person that he was working with. Some of those really, really resonated with me. So a lesson, this is really cheating, but the lesson is allow some of those ideas that you think are going to be motivational to be visually part of your life, because I could see what a difference it made for him. He could look around and say, yeah, I need to remember that point. And again, in the Zoom hybrid world, you're allowed to do that without them being sort of obvious, napkin notes, if you will. But allow those to be sort of part of what keeps you going, because it allows you to think more openly and more kind of outside of the box. If you get too boxed into a conversation, then you might find yourself sort of, tied up. You don't want to be tied in knots. You want to be free flowing. Now, a couple of those post-it notes I thought were very, very handy. One of them, which is in the book, is that I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again because it bears repeating. Telling me turns me cold. Asking me warms me up. I really like that one because I think it is just human nature that if you feel like somebody's telling, you just you feel closed down. You feel a sort of a wall, a coldness with that person that some of what they're telling you might be useful, but after a while you just feel like this is a one-way deal. We're two people. We should be having a two-way conversation.
Right.
And asking in a way that creates warmth and openness. And again, as we've discussed, that's not always easy. And there are some kinds of questions that aren't helpful questions. But if we're remembering that it's an art and we have to be creative and we have to be open, and it's an attitude that I am genuinely curious about that other person and what's going on for them. I'm not just going to impose me on them I'm not going to cross the net, as we say, then that attitude is helpful. It is intrinsically helpful to getting things done, to broadening our information base with which to make decisions. The other post that I want to just share, because
you're going into overtime on this one, but all right, get me that second post.
Yeah. I didn't promise short. I'll try to be quick. Is that Ed and I had a good relationship with a guy named Bob Johansson, who's also a BK author. He's at the Institute for the Future.
Right.
Ed and he went way back, and I really appreciated meeting him and feeling his wisdom. And Ed's post-it note was, "Don't predict the future, observe it in your grandchildren." Now, he was old enough to have grandchildren, but the principle still applies. Don't try to predict things. Look at what's out there and say, oh, what does that tell me about the future? It's the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. That one to me is so much of what I try to do, what I try to think about, is that recognition that how things are going to be different 5 years from now is already available to us. It's already visible. We just have to be open to what it is, because it's not everywhere. It's not evenly distributed yet. It's coming. So how can we be seeing those signposts on the horizon and recognizing that those are going to become today sooner than we maybe realize?
That's a great way to finish this up. I liked it, and I took it down as a person who is a 10-month-old, our first grandchild, and just spent a week with her. That one's hitting home as well. So
okay,
I'm glad you went into overtime. You did a good job on that.
All
one.
right.
Very good.
By the way, I do have to reference William Gibson. I didn't come up with that. The future is not evenly distributed. That's William Gibson, the great science fiction writer.
Good. All right. Well, good. Now you can sleep well tonight. All right. How do people get a hold of you?
Peter at ocli.org. And the OCLI acronym, just make sure that .org, because I think there are other domains like .com that are different. And that is Organizational Culture and Leadership Institute. That's what OCLI.org stands for.
Good. Well, let's grab a copy of this book.
The book comes out. I think Amazon will start shipping them on July 1st. But
we can pre-order now.
I'd love for you to pre-order.
Good.
Barrett Kohler loves for people to pre-order.
Yeah. Okay. Humble Inquiry. We're going to pre-order it.
Reach out to me. I would, and we want to build a relationship with me. I can also probably send you a signed copy if you tell me you pre-ordered. Then I'll send you a signed copy.
See, and that's the way to do it. We're going to this a bulletin for all authors. Please remember this. That we really, first of all, Amazon, not just BK, loves the pre-orders as well. But what really starts moving a book are obviously purchases, but reviews. So when we give a book away, we're losing a verified review. So pre-order the book so that you can read it and give a nice review. And here we got Peter saying, go do that and reach out and establish a relationship. He'll send you another one. But we want it, and we want a review. So and it's that book has been out, and it's a wonderful book. Congratulations. Really a thrill meeting you and talking to you. I when we started, I felt like I met you before, but I'm not sure. Now I have. Just terrific. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad we covered a lot of ground. I apologize for that. But
No, you did great. You did great. Anyway, listen, fantastic talking to you. And folks, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.